Welcome to today's Backstage. Today we are talking about the construction of Balocco Proving Ground. We have a few surprises for you in store, but before revealing them, I introduce you Carlo Andrea Celloni, who's the director of Balocco Proving Ground and who brought us a gift that we're going to show you now. Here it is. This is the plastic model of the Balocco Proving Grounds built in 1991 on the occasion of the rebuilding of the track, what Carlo mentioned as refounding. Yes, we went from 2 square kilometers to 6 square kilometers, so the area tripled. It became one of the most important proving grounds. But I'm talking about the innovation. This plastic model, it was built for the restoration of Balocco. It was exposed at the Bella Lugina, and then it went to some workshops, and now, thanks to you, we brought it here to Arese. We will restore it and we will expose it, but it is still a provisionary model, right? There are some details that change a little bit in the real configuration. Yes, it is true. Some details are not correct. In this area now there's a dynamic square that we will show later on in the video, and then also some details of the Alfa track have been remade, but I would say that 90% it represents what it is Balocco today. And we thought that the Museo Alfa Romeo would be the best place to have and keep this jewel. Thank you on behalf of the museum, on behalf of all the fans who had the opportunity of seeing it next to the plastic model of Arese that we already exposed a few years ago. But the surprises are not over. There's one more surprise. Thanks to the collaboration of Aldo and Paolo Grandi, the sons of Mr. Grandi, who wanted to give us a few images. Giancarlo Grandi was the director of Balocco for years. He was the father of Balocco, the manager of the first years of Balocco. And what we are seeing here is an incredible image. Those are Aldo and Paolo Grandi with their father in front of a TZ, who, and then this for us is an incredible witness. We've seen the plastic model. We will see a few pictures that the Grandi family gave us during the conference. But now let's have a step backwards. Let's go back to many years and let's see the origins of Balocco.
Balocco.
A small town of 250 inhabitants. A group of silent and quiet houses hidden in the rice fields of Vercelli. The Tenuta Bella Lugina is the headquarters of Alfa Romeo Experiences. Today we are here to tell you the origins of Balocco, its birth, and these documents talks about the atmosphere of those places, where the countryside clashed with the roaring engines, but Balocco also represented the future of Alfa, where the automobiles were fine-tuned to become real Alfa Romeo. 6 years ago, the construction of Balocco started, and here the GTA was born. We are in a place where Alfa Romeo of the future years was born, and now we are here to present the new GTA. What does this place represent for Alfa Romeo? For Alfa Romeo, history. To me, it's an exceptional moment, because for the first time, I'm experiencing the Balocco track, the new GTA, modified today, with all of our friends, the journalists. So to me, it is an historical moment. It is also a personal moment, because a few years ago, we tested the first. Now we are preparing the future. And it's a fantastic moment because history always explains you how to lead the future, and to me this is fundamental. Balocco, apart from being an important place, it's a place loved by fans, and passion is a lot to Alfa Romeo. Yes,
nasci con l'Alfa
you
Romeo.
are born
Sono
with the
nato in
passion
una
of
Giulia,
our Alfa Romeo. I was
ho
born in a Giulia.
vissuto in
I
un'Alfetta,
lived in an
ho
Alfetta.
guidato una
I
GTV,
drove a
quindi
GTV.
sai, non è che
So, you
sia
know,
una macchina come le
it's
altre,
not
capisci?
a car
È
like
un
any
qualcosa di
other.
completamente
It's something
differente
totally
che
different
ho vissuto
that I
personalmente,
lived
che provo
personally, that
professionalmente
I
adesso
also
con
am
una
living
passione, con
professionally now with
qualcosa
a
che
passion,
non è
with something
paragonabile.
which cannot be compared.
Questo è il futuro.
This is the future of Alfa Romeo, of Balocco, and seeing a GTA on that track is always impressive. But let's make a step back 60 years, to 6 years ago. It's the end of the 50s, and a new world opens for Alfa Romeo. Giulietta is successful, Giulia is about to be launched, or it was already in the projects of the engineers, and it was also thought to relaunch the races. So the testing grounds and proving grounds were always fundamental for Alfa Romeo. It was not only the testing a car; it was an integral part of design. Testing allows to get the performance, but also the soul of every Alfa Romeo, in order to make it recognizable and unique. For many years, testings were carried out on the roads, and Alfa Romeo had an incredible school of test drivers like Franchini, the beginning, and then Campari, then Marinoni, who just during a test on the Milano Laghi highway died because a truck driver fell asleep. He went on his lane and he was driving a Grand Prix car and he could not avoid a crash. This happened before the Second World War, and after World War II, the testing on the streets will continue, but Alfa Romeo then realized that in order to continue to give such an importance to test, it was needed to find a safe place, a quiet place that would allow to develop the cars without risking too much and without being exposed to a gossip. And 6 years ago, the history of Balocco started with the words of Giuseppe Luraghi, who, in a communication justifying this activity that had been anticipated in some correspondences before, writes, I confirm to a consultant that Alfa Romeo is interested to find a right terrain for the construction of a testing ground. The terrain should be around 1 hour from Milan by car and should allow, on one side, a 2 kilometers straight stretch. The ideal conformation of the terrain would be a rectangle, 2 kilometers and a half by 500. Apart from the straight stretch that should be plain, the rest of the terrain could be also rough. Well, better if it is. The price of this terrain should be very low because, as you would realize, it's an investment for a very limited or poor use. So the letter continues describing the details, but Balocco was born here in an area of the Vercelli province that was devoted to rice fields, but that at the time had a very low price. It's a easy surface, very close to the highway, very close to Arese, less than 1 hour, and Arese was being born in those years already, and that allowed to build a new track corresponding to all the needs of the designers and having all the characteristics of privacy also. Little by little, the track takes shape. Projects alternate, hypotheses, mock-ups, and at one point it is ready. In 1962, a few cars started racing on this track, and then in the following years, all the several parts are updated until when Balocco gets its final configuration and layout that is described in a press release in 1962 and also anticipated by the budgets of 1962, where there are also the images of its building stage, explaining also the fundamental aspects: safety, the importance for the development of Alfa Romeo cars, but also one of their characteristics of Balocco is that some parts of the racetrack were inspired by places that were already used by testers and by races. We have the curve of Monza, Lesmo, Zandvoort, but also some stretches of the Statale della Cisa, which was very known at the time for its rough places and a stretch of Ronocomo Provinciale between Rovellasca and Fino Mornasco. But apart from the racetrack, also has a headquarters, the Cascina Bella Luigina, a farmhouse, one of the many farmhouses that were present in that area of rice fields that became the headquarters. In our archive, we have a lot of technical drawings and plans, some with all the variants of the track that were conceived, but also the drawings of how Cascina Bella Luigina should have been transformed to become the headquarters with meeting rooms, apartments for those who had to live there, from the keepers to the testers, and also the garages that today are in the Auto Delta part. So, uh, potholes, bridges, fuel stations, all the parts that a testing proving ground should have. Balocco was born like this, and then it had a long history. In 1991, the service was tripled and extended, but this would be this should be devoted in another specific backstage. Now we are talking about the origins of Balocco and somehow its present and its future. And for this, we have to exit our live stream and go to Balocco. So let's meet in Balocco and shall make a comparison between the Balocco we've seen on these drawings and the Balocco of today. Usually our backstages are live streams or live conferences when it's possible, but for Balocco we thought we should come here for a day to show you the facilities, the racetrack, to trace back the links with the past, to see what's left of the racetrack, which was built in 1961, and to tell you the story and the present of an Italian excellence, a place that continues to work, continues to be developed. And as a historian, I should stop here, and now I have the pleasure to introduce you Carlo Andrea Celloni, who is the director of Balocco Proving Ground, that was called Pista Prove when it was born. Thank you, Lorenzo, and welcome. It is a pleasure to have you here, and I'm glad we shall spend the day together. We are in Cascina Bella Luigina. It was a farmhouse, one of the many farmhouses present in this rice fields area of the province of Vercelli that was bought by Alfa Romeo, halfway between Turin and Milan, in a strategic position. It was a surface where there were no roads, no rivers, no rights of way, and it also was private enough to bring here the tradition of Alfa Romeo, the testing in an efficient, private, and also safe place. So no longer were the times where you could try the race cars on the streets. The Alfette that won the World Championship in 1551 were tested on the highway junctions, but in the 60s this was no longer possible, so it was needed to create and build a racetrack that will recreate all the conditions where a car, a race car or a street car, could face, but also facilities were needed. So this farmhouse, the Bella Luigina, became the headquarters with offices, but not many offices actually, and there were also rooms where testers could stay and sleep during the night when there were long tests, and there were workshops, garages, meeting rooms, rooms for events and presentations. But today the reality has evolved. Yes, everything is the same but bigger. Now Balocco, compared to 1961, has been multiplied by 3. So we have more workshops, more rooms, more tracks. We went from the 2 tracks that, well, the 3 if we count the special pavements, to the many that we have now. We went from 10 kilometers to 80 kilometers. Every day we have more than 150 cars tested for any kind of test. from the initial stages to the final reliability tests. So we're here 24/7 with 3 shifts. And here at the Bella Lugina, what do? There is no longer a real workshop in what is called Auto Delta. There was the first garage that was then taken back by Auto Delta when 1970 the new garage was built. The warehouse of tires became Gestione Piste, but I see electric columns, and the Salafari, the lights room, is a wonderful meeting room. Yes, this in reality became the events area. So we welcome here the main events of the company. So a jack, steering committee, drive days, but also Saturday and Sunday. Sometimes we opened it to fans or we rent the racetrack. Of course, the most important element is the test, but this is the area that we call event area, and Cascina Bella Lugina is the focal point. This is a structure which is full of charm and passion, but I can hear the roaring of engines in the back. All the Alfa Romeo here became real Alfa Romeos over the years. They were shaped and molded, and here also many other cars were developed also from other brands. But now we would like to bring our fans to see the real heart of Balocco, the racetracks. Okay, come with me. Let's go, thank you. We are on the Alfa Romeo, the first of the tracks built in 1961 and immediately present on the designs. The idea was to create a track that would test hard the street cars. Balocco was born for this, but also to test race cars. And in order to do this, they imitated curves from the most important racetracks in Europe, like Lesmo, Monza, and Zandvoort. These 2 curves are just here at my back, and they are similar to the originals, even better, you told me. Yes, Zandvoort was completely rebuilt, and the designer on the Zandvoort racetrack copied our curve because their original was no longer original. Since the designer was the same of our racetrack, he copied our curve and replicated it on Zandvoort. What we are seeing here in front of us is the switchback. So before there was a straight stretch, and it was very important also for the motorbikes that were tested here. The track seen from above still maintains its physiognomy, even if some parts were adjusted in 1991 when the fast speed loop was created. But then if you go into the detail, you can see some other specifications that also took care of safety. Yes, in 2018 we certified again completely the racetrack with this designer, who's also the designer of Zandvoort, of Silverstone, of Sepang, so all Formula One circuits. So he certified it, and now it is no longer considered the speed, but also the handling. Some straight stretches were interrupted, but this is certified in some parts for 333 kilometers per hour.
Si trovano però qui
Here
ancora,
we have some witnesses of the Balocco of the past. If the track widened and then made safer, we are now on a link road which was built at the time of Auto Delta and afterwards when Auto Delta went back to Formula One to give way to a series of variants, and sometimes also to inverse the way of driving in order to try always different emotions and feelings and to simulate the different racetracks. But now let's continue. Let's finish with the Alpha track, and let's go to another historical point, very important and recognizable, of Balocco, present since the beginning. Yes, Lorenzo, I just want to add that this track is 5 kilometers, 0.7 long, exactly like the Monza racetrack. So it is not the Monza racetrack, but it has all the most important curves of the Formula One circuits of the time.
Andiamo in macchina e finiamo
Let's
il
get
giro.
in the car and let's finish the lap.
E qui siamo un po' all'inizio.
And here we are at the beginning of the Alfa Romeo track, where there was the first box, which was no longer 1961, of course, now it's wider. Here there was just a metal box where the testers would stop: Sanesi, Moroni, Bonini, Brignoli, the wonderful seven. And it was the headquarters. And before this, we started also the special pavings. And then what's now the purpose of the first box? Well, now it is used for the special pavings that are integral part of a cycle, testifying the 10 years of life of a car. So of course we use these paved roads where we calculate and simulate all the energies, the wear and tear, and so we can test 10 years, the equivalent of 10 years of a car. This is what was created in 1961, and then in 1991 it was redone. We went from little bit more than 2 square kilometers and 10 kilometers of tracks to 6 square kilometers, a little bit less, and more than 80 kilometers of racetracks. And what about the pavings? We have the same. We have Via Procaccini. It was made identical to the street in Milan where the testers before Balocco went, and also the Pavé Belga, the devilish pavé, where you also use special seats in order not to ruin your back. Yes, and the project was so good that we have not redone it. Looks like it's new. So I must say that the focus of Balocco is this. Even third parties ask us to come here to test other cars of other brands. So we will continue for these 400 meters of this street until we get to the third box. We will not see the first crash test of Balocco. The crash test was done there, usually where there are those bushes with a pothole where a remote control car would go and crash against a wall of cement blocks. There was a pothole with a high-speed camera, sometimes with a man who would take the shot, and that camera is still present in the museum in our collection. But the crash tests have changed. Yes, now the crash tests have evolved, and they are no longer done here. They were moved from here to another area that we will see later, but there was then a third step. Now we have the safety center, where the tests are even more stricter. So let's now go to the easiest street out of these paved streets, and let's go to the third box.
Io ho scelto la strada
I chose the easiest way because we need to protect the historical assets of Alfa Romeo. So after 400 meters, we are here, where at the beginning of Balocco, there was the start of the Alfa Romeo track, but now there's a variant, while in the past there was a narrower track so that some pilots, like Lauda, refused to drive in certain conditions. You arrived straight with a 1,500 meters radius curve, and then at the corner there was another box, the second box, that was then rebuilt in 1985, which is still present, even though the purpose is different. There was the braking stretch, and then behind the embankment there were the ramps that you rebuilt. Yes, now with the rebuilding and restructuring and certification of the new racetrack, the ramps were cancelled and we rebuilt new ones, more performing ones. I will show you them later on. And those were historical, but they were no longer fit for our tests. We needed to have longer and higher ramps. But I'm curious, this is a testing ground, but you have different tires. Yes, but I did it on purpose because Giulia also has two different sizes of tires within front and back, and here it is we have summer wheels in the front and winter in the back. It's used to test the oversteer. This is used for internal driving schools, this car, so it's not a mistake. Okay, so this is clear. And here another box was built, which became the headquarters of test drivers. When then the shift durability track was created. It is still the shift durability track. So we test the shifts in certain specific points where the slowdowns are preset. This track was certified again by our super expert, international expert, and this box, this is interesting, remain destined to that purpose. So the drivers who do the endurance tests, when they have a break, they stop there to have their break because they cannot drive longer than 2 hours on a row. And the original projects of Balocco from the end of the 50s, and also in a model that was built before the track, a huge artificial pond was present, and water should have been used for the wet surfaces, wet streets. This was not done, but there is a small pond. Yes, in that direction. I can show it you later. There's a beautiful pond. Looks like a protected area full of ducks and birds and other animals. And I think that migratory birds also stop here. And next to it, we have the wet track, which is a short track, 400 meters, where we test cars on a wet road. Very well, so can you show us the new ramps before seeing the newer racetracks and that were not present in the Balocco of 1961? Yes, let's go there then.
Andiamo. Questa una volta era
This was once the entrance of the Alfa Romeo racetrack, and now we still have a country road. And now we are here to see the new slopes. Yes, we have the new slopes. There's 11 different types of slopes. We also have 4 which are wet with mousse split, so part in asphalt and part imitating ice. And as you can see, them are more massive than the original ones. So when in 1991 the track was widened and redone because the surface tripled, arriving to 500 hectares, 2 tracks, very important ones, were built from scratch. Also having to modify, allow the intersection with what was already existing, the pista langhe and a high-speed loop. Yes, Balocco tripled in size, and the space was used at its best. This is an intersection of tracks. It's like a Russian doll. There's many tracks, one inside the other. Others are intersecting. This is a Lange track, very long, 22 kilometers long, and it has 147 curves, and it also have different slopes. There's a plain part, the initial one, and then there's a part which imitates a hill. It's like an extra urban road, which is, as I said, plain and then hilly. It is modular, so in these 22 kilometers, you can build a circuits going from 4 kilometers and a half actually, up to 22 full kilometers. And then there's the speed loop. It's a 7.9 kilometers racetrack. It is a high-speed track. You drive to the left, as the English do. It's made up of 3 long straight stretches and very wide radiuses curves. You can drive 240 kilometers per hour, but you can reach 330 kilometers per hour in the straight stretches. It is the most used track because it is very versatile.
È stato un giro.
It was a very interesting day, but now we have to leave, and in order to say goodbye, let's find a special place. What we see on the asphalt actually are the tracks of the old gate of Balocco in 1961. There was a very long pine wood here where some fans, and me too, sometimes came here to find secrets and spot a race car. And this was the provincial road, and those were rice fields and countryside. In 1991, these were both. The provincial road became internal road. This gate was removed, but in the new fields, new tracks were born. Yes, many others. As you can see here, we have the off-road track, and then after we have the road that passed by, the ABS track, and then another one, the Piazzale Dinamico, the dynamic square, and then we have the special paved streets for special vehicles. So we tripled, as we said, the size of Balocco. Off-road and Piazzale Dinamico are 2 excellent elements of Balocco. Yes, the off-road surprised me because when the Americans of Jeep saw our track, they asked us the projects to replicate it. And we were not that expert in off-road, but we had here a perfect situation to simulate all the main obstacles that can show off the characteristics of an off-road vehicle or a Jeep. So we have 27 obstacles that allow to test every single performance and feature of an off-road car. And then we have a so-called Piazzale Dinamico, which is like an airport, 1,300 meters long. There are planes that can land there. The Bolzano airport is shorter, just to give you an idea. We have the ABS track, where you can test and try not only cars, but also trucks. Look, I want to thank you for this incredible day. It was a pleasure for me. See you soon. And now you see why we decided to have the GTA at our back. Here, it was an emotion to see it and drive it on Balocco where it was born. But let's get back to the documents of our archive and document center. We talked about a few elements that are then present also in the documents. Also, the most curious ones. We thought about pines protecting from the eyes outside the tracks. In reality, very often on the magazines there were stolen shots where you could see the pine branches. Sometimes they were really stolen, some other times it was Carlo Kitty or the press office who said to the photographers, go back that tree or back that bush in order to give the idea of the stolen shot. But those pines were part of the initial project, and an entire specification of the project was called concealment and plants, where the different species of trees were considered, like cypress, larch, pines, and all the distances and the depths were considered, and also the prices of the different plants and trees that would be planted. And then we have several reports. So we have a lot of reports describing all the deliveries of the different parts of the tracks. Like in this case, you can read after the first loop, long 3,550 meters, started its operation. The second part has begun construction. After May, the total track will become 5,800 meters until the entire Balocco racetrack would be completed after some years. And then in the archive, we have the reports of the tests. We have divided by model the acceleration tests, the braking tests, performance tests, but also the tire tests. And for each of the tests, several brands were compared, new and 50%, in endless comparisons that would help give an idea to the designers. The same happened with the shifts, the rev counters of Giulia, for example, and then we have the reports of the performances of each car with all the reviews by model, until we have the tests of competition cars, where often tracks inside the tracks were built in order to imitate the conditions. So we have all the specifications of the timings on a north circuit like Sebring, 3,675 meters, and then the small circuit, and also an external circuit of 1,408 meters with no curves except the main ones, where you could run at high speed. So these timings were then written by hand on endless reports that listed the pilot, the date, the track. We know it was Alfa Formula 1 Turbo 4 cylinders. Giorgio Francia was the driver, 8th of January of 1987. So dry track with 5 degrees, and in some reports the temperature was below zero when they tested the Formula 1 cars. And then all the timings and the wind, maximum speed, time of every lap. So it's endless. We have dozens of these folders. So imagine how systematic and intense was the activity of testing on the Balocco testing grounds. But we also have objects in our archive telling the story of this place and these moments. And everything arrived in the moments in 2 sealed boxes when an employee that worked his entire life at Balocco, he decided to send to the museum some objects that would have told some less known aspects of that racetrack. First of all, the timekeeping element. Alfa Romeo had among its employees Armando Teitman, who was the official timekeeper of Monza, that who arrived in Alfa to bring a scientific method in this timekeeping science. But Teitman worked for Alfa Romeo before Balocco. He was the one seated next to Consalvo Sanesi in the Giulietta Spada Veloce in the famous challenge against the Sette Bello train from Milan to Rome. And then in Balocco, he started to instill the timekeeping culture. Balocco was always at the cutting edge in this field. We have here some analog chronometers, and then the first digital ones with the photocells. as well as we have some more common objects, like the measuring tape to measure the distance between the photo cells, the clichés to paint arrows on the track, but also a microphone, which was used to measure the sounds of the engines of Alfa Romeo cars, and a thermometer to test the temperature of the asphalt, as we still do today for the races. And there's also an object that today is quite curious, because as you can see, it's a homemade with a pipe, I would say plastic pipe, inside which a big rev counter was put. This rev counter was connected to the car, to the engine, and it was kept either by the technician in the car or by the pilot between his legs, and it was used to have the exact instant speed. So the instruments of the car were not that precise in order to be used as indicators, but such a big rev counter was more precise, so everything was calculated, and you know that at a certain speed, certain capacity and acceleration were calculated, so before the telemetry could identify the instant speed. And then in the end, as we said during the video, we have one of the high-speed cameras that were used in the first crash tests. These are all objects that are halfway between the archive and the museum. These things need to be explained, but the backstage has just this role to see what was there behind the cars, but also behind the headquarters or behind the small Alfa world of Balocco. So our story is concluded, but now let's give you space for the Q&A session in just a few seconds. So you can have the possibility to ask about details behind these objects and documents, but you can also leave Balocco today, because we will have again Carlo Andrea Celloni with us, who supported us in this adventure, and who will be happy to answer your questions. See you. And here we are. It is the moment when you are the protagonists. We tried to tell you everything, or at least what we could reasonably tell. In fact, there were so many stories, endless details to tell. But we are here with Carlo Andrea to answer your questions that, as usual, Raffaella Quaccaro will ask from what you write in our page. So first of all, I would like to welcome all of our friends who are again following us from all over the world. It is nice to see that the passion for Alfa Romeo unites us during these backstages. Let's start with Carlo Andrea. When shall we visit? When shall we visit, or when we will have the occasion to come again to Balocco? It is what we were saying before with Balocco. We are waiting for this long pause due to the pandemic to end. There are good signals. We have to see what we can organize. I cannot promise anything, of course, at the moment. Balocco is open to external events, but not very open actually to external events. We just have to organize something, but for the museum, we will try to do our best. Cesare asks, maybe you already said this in the beginning, can you tell us something about the track that Balocco replaced, that strip of asphalt running parallel to the highway? Actually, it is two different stories. Balocco was born in 1961, 1962 was inaugurated even though not officially, and it is a track that was born as Alfa Romeo. That is the straight stretch of Marene, which was developed in parallel with the Torino Savona and used by Fiat before the two companies were united. So it's two similar stories because the same thing was made, so testing cars, but these were not the same story. Claudio asks, now there is a first alternative on the Alfa track. The building to the right was used as a box for Formula 1 at the times of Kitty, but actually it was not a box. The three building blocks were actually places where you entered on foot, where pilots rested and still get rest, but these were not real boxes. They were just resting points. And then, of course, the cars stopped there, some activities were performed there on the track, but the main actions were made in Cascina Bella Luigina, in a dedicated area, which at the beginning was the only garage, and that then, with the inauguration of the new garage at the beginning of the 70s, was used more exclusively by Autodelta and by Formula 1, because in that garage there were not only bridges, but there was also a pit, which was very comfortable to work on the Formula 1 cars. Question for Carlo Andrea. Well, it's not a question, it's a comment by Sebastiano. We should go back to do real tests, not only events, but actually I think that, yeah, Sebastiano can rest assured. 98% of our time is devoted 24/7 to the proving grounds, testing cars. And then there's this 2% of events that, of course, are a source of income, but also a showcase to show our customers our excellence. Balocco is known all over the world, and it is also a pleasure to show off sometimes. I continue with the question, in a normal day, how many cars are tested at the same time? Well, it depends on the season. Of course, the peak starts this month, April, and then it continues until November. We are lucky enough to have a wonderful climate. We have a Mediterranean climate, despite the mosquitoes. Yes, despite the mosquitoes. But in the car, you don't feel them a lot. So, I would say, especially in July, September, and October, we arrive at more than 200 cars per day, simultaneously a little bit less, 120, 130. But at the end of the day, we have 220, 250 cars that were tested on the grounds. The camouflage tonale is already on the track. Yes, of course. Is there a registry? This is as by Lorenzo. Registry of kilometers for each tester. It's true that Zeccoli was unbeatable on the Alfa Romeo track, but there is no official registry of kilometers. It is easy to understand by looking at the reports, at the documents, that the testers had a long activity from morning to evening. So I imagine that the kilometers would be a lot. Concerning the specialization of the testers on Balocco, it is clear that such an intense and prolonged training led them to know not every curve but every pebble of the track. So for a pilot, even though it was a good pilot, but arriving for the first time, it was difficult to stand up to the other testers who spent their entire days there. Zeccoli arrives with Autodelta, but there were other testers that for 30 years drove on Balocco. It was not a race, but I'm sure they would have competed with the real pilots. Few names of Formula 1 pilots who drove in Balocco, asks Claudio. Well, for Alfa Romeo, all of them. All of the pilots who raced for Alfa Romeo, sometimes those who raced for Ferrari, but also former pilots of Alfa Romeo. drove on Balocco. We've seen Fangio on some pictures, and who more than Fangio was an Alfa Romeo pilot for Formula One, and he drove for several, but also Schumacher drove on several occasions, and maybe other champions. Yes, Raikkonen came here again last year, as well as Giovanardi. Question to Carlo. How can you manage all those cars simultaneously on the tracks with all the variants and variables of tracks? But we have very strict safety rules. Our pilots cannot go on the track unless they have followed a training on behavioral norms, as we call it. It's a strict training lasting 2 hours, where you don't test their capacity of driving, of course, but their capacity of being on the track with respect. So for every track, and we have 27 of them, there is a norm. You have to know how to overpass, how to get past, you have to know how to behave on that track. There's a theoretical part and then a practical part. There's also a test, and some people are rejected, and this means that it is safe. Apart from the plastic model, you also gave us the manuals, the training manuals defining all these norms and showing for every track the norms to follow and the behaviors to follow. So, and I hope that for every update you will send one to the museum, of course. There is also another training course that is done on the capacity of our drivers to have even a stricter tests. As you probably know, the development of a car starts with the so-called muletti, the mock cars, and then there are other types of prototypes, and then pre-series, and then the series cars. So according to the development of the project, the capacity of the driver must be higher. So the earlier the stage of the project, the better the pilot must be in order to answer to unexpected behaviors of the car, because now there are very complex also technological sides that are intertwined. A question from Argentina. What is the record track time and who did it? Which pilot? I cannot tell. I cannot tell it, but Balocco is not a track for records. It's a testing ground. So there are free laps, but we don't do the time attack or something like that, or we shouldn't do that. But it is not a real record, but on those documents that we saw before, or in one of those 1,000 pages, there are 2 laps made by Francia on a Formula One, which are precise to the millisecond for their halftime, and that is important. Francesco asks whether you use the GPS during the tests in order to know how many cars are running on the tracks. Yes, we have a monitoring system allowing us to know in real time how many cars we have on the tracks, and also to consider the trajectories in case of accident, in case of claims, and sometimes this might happen. The idea of passing from the street to the tracks for testing grounds at the birth of Balocco was due to Luraghi or to other managers of the time. Well, in that golden period, going from the mid-50s to the beginning of the 70s, Alfa Romeo was growing exponentially. Many things were inaugurated. The Arese ground was built, Alfa Sud was built, and Balocco was built. So what was the trend or the need of the company found also the opportunity to be realized. In reality, the tests were determining, and starting from before the war, people and car producers were looking for safer grounds because before streets were used, but also the circuits were used. Monza was used a lot for tests, not only for races, but of course having a own track, private and with all the conditions, well, that was a great advantage. We didn't find in the archive traces defining the willingness to build another track apart from Balocco before. But for sure, the idea of having a safe and private environment touched the ideas, I would say, of previous managers of Alfa Romeo to Luraghi. And then Luraghi led, in a way, Alfa Romeo in a period of great development, and he was also one of the main characters of this improvement. But we'll stop here because we will devote a backstage to him. Giuseppe asks, is it true that curves had to be numbered because there were so many that in case of emergency pilots could no longer express their position? Yes, it is true, and it is extremely useful for us and to our safety pool in order to be as quick as possible in the rescue. As you know, in case of accident, it is fundamental to reach the place of the accident as soon as possible. Our goal is to reach it in 4 minutes, and knowing exactly with the GPS the number of the curve is extremely important. It is fundamental to reach this goal. Pablo asks, how many Formula One were tested in Balocco? Well, in the case of Alfa Romeo, all of them. One in particular is particularly the Formula One with the highest kilometers ever, the Type 177, which is called 177 because it was developed starting from 1977, but would debut only in 1979 when the 179 was already ready. But that is a Formula One which was built in a single chassis, modified endlessly, and that car was tested, especially in Balocco, for 3 years, continuing also after its debut. And then there were the 179, 182, 183, 185, and then also the prototypes with the 4-cylinders turbo and the 10 cylinders. And then Alfa Romeo withdrew from Formula One and also as a supplier of engines after a few years with Losella, and a missed adventure with La Ligier, but also Ferrari Formula One in the following years were tested here. Claudio says, in 1984, I was outside the network and I saw the Alfa Ligier on the track with 4 cylinders turbo, and the guard went outside to send us away, as you remember. Question: have you ever found uninvited people inside? No. Luckily, I've been in Balocco for 12 years now, and I'm glad about it. It's a wonderful job. I love it, and in 12 years, we never had. So I'm not inviting anyone to break the rules, but no, we have a great safety service internally. And we never had surprises. No pictures, no photos were published over the last 12 years. Not authorized. Has the circuit ever tested for non-Alfa cars? Maybe of other brands? Well, no, actually, we have a, how could I say, a policy devoting Balocco Proving Ground only to the cars of the group. There's an exception for Ferrari, but you know that, you can imagine, Ferrari represents 6% of the total tests that we perform in Balocco. There are a few exceptions for small brands that are not competitors of our brands. In general, it's about hypercars, also electric ones. Charles Leclerc drove in Balocco. Charles Leclerc, no? Or yes, maybe, yes, once he came there. I confirm. It was at the beginning of my adventure in Alfa Romeo. Yeah, you're true. 164 Pro car with V10 was developed in Balocco or somewhere else? In Balocco. The pictures that we have in the archive were taken in Balocco. The tests were carried out in Balocco. The only time that a Pro car went out of Balocco was just to open the Italian Grand Prix with Riccardo Patrese on that great lap that everyone remembers. In Balocco, the Pro car also risked an accident because during a test it lost a spoiler, which is the only difference compared to the normal 164. And if you go at 340 kilometers per hour, it is not a nice moment. The 8C and the 4C, asks Vincenzo. Well, 4C and 8C were developed practically completely in Balocco. Now in Balocco we are able to develop completely the cars without getting out of the tracks. Always for Carlo, how do you manage accidents or emergencies on the tracks? Well, we have a team of firefighters that work there 24/7. They are a very good professional firefighters that are also volunteers during their time off. They are incredible, exceptional, I would say. We also have a team of rescuers, always 24/7. And as I said before, our goal is to reach every accident within 4 minutes. But the grounds of Balocco are 2 kilometers wide by 3 kilometers. And every year we also simulate accidents. We also put people, dummies, in order to replicate the real conditions. We consider how to extract a person. We have all the best tools. We have the cutters to cut the body of the cars, just like the firefighters use in real life. And the simulations, because luckily we didn't have recent accidents, well, the simulations tell us that we reach the accident within 4 or 5 minutes, and that depends on the difficulty of the accident, because as I said, there are overturned cars or cars that are off-road. But within 20 minutes usually we finished the intervention and the track is ready for the next tests. Do you still use modified alphas to extinguish the fires as in the past, the 164 Berlin? No. We have Iveco professional cars, the same as the professional firefighters use. And talk about this, someone asked if we will repeat the Backstage that we had 1 or 2 years ago, dedicated to the firefighting tracks modified for Balocco. It was a very fun Backstage event. I would like to repeat it, but actually we have so many topics again to narrate and to talk about that probably not. We will not replicate it. We will find other interesting ones, but I'm happy that you remembered it. Since in that area there's frequent fog, the tracks are closed and test is suspended. Did it happen? Does it happen? Yes, it happened, and it happens less and less, because I remember that that was an area of fogs, but it is no longer. We have a very strict standards. So according to the millimeters of rain and the visibility, we close the tracks until we have the right conditions of visibility or the rain stops. Another question, even though I already know the answer, internal races had ever been made inside Balocco? No, not over the last 12 years. Gianluca asks, says, Balocco shaped the character of Alfa Romeo. Its first front-wheel drive, Alfa Suden 164, the first project with Fiat Auto, but the character of the brand never faded, also thanks to this circuit. Well, the test can be both the part of the test related to reliability, but also means fine-tuning the behavior on the road, and for Alfa Romeo this has always been a very important aspect. Alfa Romeo becomes Alfa Romeo when it is conceived and planned and drawn, but also it becomes an Alfa Romeo when it is tested and fine-tuned. So Balocco and the long and incredible school of test drivers that were based in Balocco, but who also worked on the street and work on the street, were and are a fundamental element that make an Alfa Romeo what it is an Alfa Romeo. Also, the Formula Indy were tested on the track of Balocco. Well, it happened when Alfa Romeo started to race in the Formula Indy, but those cars have very specific characteristics and they require specific tracks, also similar to the ones where then they race. So I would not define it as a regular activity, at least considering the reports that we still have. Many comments we have received about the archive materials that you showed during the conference, the pictures. For example, a follower signals Alfa Brabham in white in that livery. Yes, when the agreement was presented, well, we show we see Bernie Ecclestone and Carlo when we talk about the ramps, because that presentation was done using as a background the ramps with a banner celebrating the World Championship of Brand in 1965. The Brabham Alpha with the white livery was presented, and next to it there are the Type 512 and the engines of the 512 and the engine of the 33 TT12, because the three of them were 12 cylinders boxers. So the tradition of Alfa Romeo intertwined with the last World Championship won and the adventure of Formula One. Then we know that for commercial sponsoring agreements, white will leave place to the red, but the presentation was done still with a white livery. Carlo, has the circuit ever been used as a set for a cinema, for movies? No, not for movies, but it is used systematically for our presentations to the press. So I see it always in our commercials. I see that there are many parts of the track that I recognize. A question on the crash test. As you explained, Lorenzo, it was then moved, but it was always in Balocco in another area, or after those first years with the crash test, which was still rough next to the special paved roads, the importance of safety and of crash tests on cars became greater and greater, also for reasons of law. So a new track was built for crash tests with a long track starting outside the garage and the wall where you simulated the impact inside the garage. So the car was not remote controlled but dragged on this track by a truck, which then launched it inside the garage, and then the car was free, like in a real accident. The curiosity is that in order to drag the car, in the beginning, two Montreal engines linked to a winch were used. So they dragged the car and then thrashed it against the wall. So then the two Montreal engines were replaced by two engines of the 164 with 3024 valves, because meanwhile they had a better power, automatic shift, and greater torque. Another question for Carlo Andrea. Is it possible to list the types of critical climate simulations or wet simulations that you can do? Do you also have an off-road? Yes, we have 3 tracks without asphalt. We have a white road, country road, and the off-road. These 3 are couple of kilometers long. The off-road is the longest, it's 2 kilometers, 0.7. What was the first part of the question, actually? So list the types of simulations that you can do with rain or critical climate. Well, we have a wet track and we have a steering pad. So we have like a circle, a wet circle, where the car can go, and when we've seen it in the conference, I think, and then we can simulate fords, for example. I did it. I draw it. I simulated an overpass. So a car that goes on a flooded underpass, just to see how the engine performs, and it is very wide underpass. It is a new concept compared to the ones that we can see in the other proving grounds, because it is as wide as a road, with all the flux waves simulating perfectly what happens if you have to go on a flooded underpass. And we have other fords with salty water, clear water. We have a very long ford simulating rain, and it is used to test leakage of water in the doors and the various joints, etc. And now we have one of those guys hiding behind the pines. Massimo says, I was a kid and I remember in the pines I saw Emerson Fittipaldi and Giacomelli. So we have the people you mentioned before. Filippo says, it was beautiful to see the images of a Balocco on the test of the 75, which was a mythical, an icon. And then another memory as a child. I remember with my bicycle, I was next to Corso Campione, and the testers went to a bar close to the Arco della Pace, and there I saw the testers in a bar having coffee. So, and this links to another area, because next to there's Via Procaccini. When you talked about the spatial paved ways, you said that the track is called Via Procaccini because it replaces the paved way of Via Procaccini, a street in Milan. Until when did they tested Alfa in the streets of the city? I don't know exactly until when they drove on Via Procaccini, but the cars never stopped being tested on the city streets. In the past, without the proving grounds, the tests were performed on the street, but the reliability tests, for example, are made in the city streets with camouflage prototypes and with cars where there is no real camouflage, but there are hidden elements. In the past, the camouflage was very complex. They built bodies of cars which were then screwed on the real body of the car. Now, more frequent is to see digital graphics, just films that are placed on the car, but make it really difficult to the eye to understand the real shape of the body. It is true that the Alfa Formula 1 was tested for the first time during the night in order to escape the flashes of photographs, and there were torches, oil torches on the track in order for the pilot to see the curves. Well, this to me looks a little bit extreme. I would exclude it, but I don't know. I will note it down and I will investigate more to see if that car without lights were tested at night. At night, of course, there were street cars with headlamps that were tested. Cars that were camouflaged during the day at night were freed from the camouflage to make more realistic tests with their aerodynamics, and then they were camouflaged again in the morning. But these were normal cars. We will look for information about this story. We've seen that they also drove January the 8th with below zero temperatures, but at night, I don't know, I'm not sure. From history to the future, a couple of questions for Carlo Andrea. One from Carol, who says, with the new hybrid and electric platforms, will you change the actual tracks or the tests performed in Balocco? And Jose Bosco from Brazil says, I would like to know whether there will be an evolution of Balocco with new tracks if there are modifications or improvements, especially for the evolution of the new cars. Well, I would say that Balocco at the moment, the Balocco Proving Ground, is quite complete in terms of the development of the dynamics of the vehicle. All the tests that are necessary can be performed there. There is an evolution in terms of self-drive. On self-drive, we will have to do for sure some investments and improvements, because self-drive in cars together with electric drive are the future. So we always we go more and more towards an artificially intelligent driven car and not a car driven by a human being, and this is important. So we will have to simulate all the situations and features that at the moment characterize an intelligent car. Just to make an example, talk about artificial intelligence. It is interesting to understand what the artificial intelligence that must be programmed will do or will have to do in case the car has to decide whether to go against a person who is crossing the road or steer and go on another lane and causing an accident with another car. So these two things are colliding. You have to take a decision. In this case, the track again will have to simulate these people's crossings that we already do because we have dummies, robotized dummies, etc. But more and more, we're going towards a combination of these situations that are strange but might happen and might create accidents. I would conclude with a comment by Alberto, who I believe represents well the feeling of those who are following us. He's saying for a Alfa lover, driving Balocco is like to go to a fair ground for a child. Thank you. Thank you for making us relive that experience. It is a magical track. Well, we hope that we will have again the opportunity to go for real to Balocco. We were invited just a few minutes ago, so we will try to do our best. And the building starts before, but Balocco officially was born in 1962, so next year there will be a birthday to celebrate. We will try to find nice ideas also involving you, the fans and the Alfa Romeo owners. Having said so, we finish our meeting. It was incredibly interesting. I hope you enjoyed it. I thank Carlo Andrea for his contribution, which was fundamental from the beginning to this moment. I thank the Grandi family who gave us incredible images never seen before. I thank our colleagues from the museum that, as usual, worked to make this possible. And I thank you who watched us and stayed with us for more than 1 hour. And see you to the next Backstage. Thank you. Have a nice day. And thank you.